Are you guys enjoying the meal? Yes. Y'all ready for some good conversation? Yes. Yeah, I see one person in the front excited. You guys ready for some good conversation? Yes. We have got Miss Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore here for our kickoff for our Empowerwest book read. And this is the Lunch and Learn session where you're going to learn all about ADOS. So if you could direct your eyes to the screens, we're getting ready to get started.
The Empowerwest Louisville Citywide Book Club, featuring Dr. Marisha Baradara, national renowned author of The Color of Money.
In each historical moment where wealth is being created, so during the Homestead Act, FHA mortgage credit, and all of the farm loan programs, Black communities were shut out of land and wealth accumulation.
Chat with the author. Thursday, February 20th at 7 p.m. 2800 Frankfurt Avenue at Crescent Hill Baptist Church.
White American households own 90% of the national wealth. In contrast, Black Americans altogether own less than 2.6% of the national wealth. With most of the small sliver being in the hands of Black baby boom retirees.
When you're talking about businesses, Black businesses, when you're talking about Black banks, undercapitalized, how do you protect their bases, Black people, if we don't have it? That's why we got to do payday loans and stuff. Not because we're irresponsible. It's the last chance. That's where we go when we ain't got no effort, that we don't have no savings. Because of what has been done to us in this country.
Simmons College of Kentucky presents the Empowerwest Louisville Citywide Book Club.
All right, coming up next is a highlight from last year's conference, the first ever ADOS conference held here in Louisville, Kentucky at St. Stephen Church. And how many of you guys are ready for this year's conference, 2020? ADOS 2020, it's going to be coming up in October. So here is a highlight from last year's conference.
We want to check that MLK said we wanted. We're coming to get our check. That's what this is. They have called us bots. They have said we don't exist. They have said we're not real people.
So let me start off by just telling you, neither myself, Yvette, our core ADOS supporters are in support of Donald Trump or the Republicans. Much of their programs and policies have destroyed Black America. We are here demanding a Democratic Party that has sucked the very life juice out of Black communities. The protections outlined in the Voting Rights Act are essential to protecting the rights of Adolf in America. Reinstituting the protections of our Voting Rights Act is a key part of our agenda.
In that committee, what happens is, how do we follow the money?
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here, and this is an incredibly important topic. It's something that I think, fortunately, its time has come.
It's true. It's true. And I love them too, but I got to tell the truth. You see, when you love people, you respect them, you protect them, but you also correct them. I'm Brown. You make a fundamental decision. You award it. And what's wonderful about ADOS, you all are generating love warriors.
Decades before it's time for the next conversation. So I believe that after the Civil Rights Movement, first you have the Civil Rights Movement, there was a long time, we know the history.
America's answer to this chasm of difference in wealth has been to ignore it. There is no answer to the difference in wealth between whites and blacks in America other than a reckoning that repairs America's economic soul. White America gave us Trump. We did not. They voted for him and digested his message of making America great again. Black America did not. Recent research for ABC showed that 58% of whites voted for Trump, while only 8% of blacks voted for Trump. 88% of blacks voted for Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. Only 37% of whites voted for Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. White America gave us Donald Trump, and he has wreaked havoc on black American families. Now, our repayment for our commitment to the Democrats is repaid with being ignored or jumbled into broad class-based policies justified by using bad economic analysis of the corrective impact that
And what the work that ADOS had to do to get the NAACP to file an amicus brief. The role that we had to play to get these senators to come on board. We shouldn't have to work that hard. These are institutions that have as their charge us. They say, we work for black people. We work for ADOS. That's our history. If that's your history, you need to work for us, because if you know what, if you don't do it, we're going to end up coming for you. If you don't want to work for us, this is Project Takeover. No. The days of us running away from the institutions that belong to us as a collective, and the institutions that we should be running to and taking over are over. We're taking them over. We have not only invited every candidate to the conference, as Antonio has said, and we went back and forth with one of them. We went back and forth with all of them. We went back and forth with Elizabeth Warren's camp for a very long time. We have tried, and none of these candidates, except for Marianne Williamson, has decided that they're going to come to the table and even listen to us seriously on the issue of reparations and a black agenda. And so people have been asking me and Antonio, what are you going to do? I bet they just go the way of the Democrats. They just going to talk for a long time and they going to do nothing. Well, we have decided that if Democrats do not come around to what we need them to come around, we have to stand on our square. And we have said in no uncertain terms that politics is an exchange. It's not a gift. So what that means, we're not just going to stay at home. What that means is that we have decided that we're voting down ballot. Democrat. We got a lot of Democrats that need our help, whether it's your local city councilman, local state lawmaker, local dog catcher, whatever. They need you to come out and vote. But we're not voting for these national Democrats. They're not going to give us our due. They still got time. They still got time. They can still come around. But if they don't, show up to the polls, get your sticker, but vote down ballot.
Can we actually pull up, if we still have it from my speech, poll 2? I want to pull that back up. Because if you recall, even if they don't pull up poll 2, I showed you that white folks have been voting Republican for 50 years. We, on the other hand, have been voting 90% Democrat for 50 years. Now, the reason I'm saying that to you is because now is the time, as I've shown you from the data, where we need to exact the exchange. So while they're chasing the ghost of white voters, they're about to be missing some black ones. So today, Adolf, our position is to vote down ballot, which means vote Democrat on everything down ballot. If these candidates can come forward and read the ADOS 101 agenda.
Hello everyone, my name is Kevin Cosby. I'm the pastor of St. Stephen Baptist Church and the president of Simmons College of Kentucky. I would like to thank you for coming and sharing what will be an exciting 2 days. First of all, we have Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore, who are, in my opinion, modern day Martin Luther King Jr.'s and Frederick Douglass's and Harriet Tubman's. Sometimes you don't know when greatness is in your midst until the era or the epic passes and you reflect back over it and say, you know what, we had greatness in our midst and we did not realize it. And so I am honored to welcome you to this sacred space, especially our friends from Goodwill who are here at this table, and we thank God for them. The HOS movement is the most important movement in my adult lifetime. It is taking us back to our mission, the mission that we drifted from in the 60s. And Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore have been instrumental in spearheading a much needed movement that is a voice for voiceless people, namely the American descendants of slavery. So I'm going to introduce at this time one of the most, I call her my president, and that is the fabulous Miss Yvette Carnell. I want you to see her.
Black intellectuals found their voice with this debate.
If Harriet was part of your lived experience as an ADOS, you could bring it to that role.
They are the American descendants of slavery, or ADOS for short. And they argue that black Americans, who are the children of African immigrants, have it entirely different than African descendants of slaves. In Atlanta, we met one of the group's founders, Yvette Carnell.
Well, there's an expectation that Yvette is xenophobic and Yvette hates black immigrants, and that's just not the case.
She told us that she is ADOS, but says that I am not because my parents immigrated here from Nigeria.
I'm lighter than you. I'm far lighter than you. But like the cost that we bear is because of being brought here as slaves is very different.
We got very personal.
Just because you have melanin and kinky hair doesn't mean you have the same background and you're tied to that kind of systemic oppression in this country. So yes, you can come from Nigeria, you can come from Ghana. You're kind of the opposite of what we are, though. You're the elite where you come from. We're the bottom caste here. We just look alike.
It sounds like you're saying that the American part of African American is more important to African descendants of slavery.
I think it's essential because we built the richest country in the world. But we've always been very, very giving and very accepting of black immigrants in this country. We always have. But it's a problem when you look at the number of these roles, especially lead roles, which are going to other groups and other people, even though we fought for the opportunity to be in those roles. And we didn't get to school in London. Like, we didn't go from Nigeria to London to different backgrounds. You look at Cynthia Erivo, it's not the same as my background. I'm a bottom caste in this country. That's different than what you came from. And so we don't have access to the things and opportunities that we fought for.
Her definition, I tried to argue that our white photographer who was recording our interview was more black American than I.
But see, here's the thing. He's not more black American because he didn't bear the cost, because he looks like Jay.
At the heart of this black agenda is the hope for reparations. The idea that America owes the descendants of slaves a certain dollar figure for the trauma of their history.
Yvette Carnell.
How's everybody doing? For those, I don't know how many people in here, so I just want to do a quick kind of review in terms of American descendants of slavery as an institution, right? Because we're talking about this book tomorrow about black banking and black money and the lack of black money and the lack of institutional support. And I think you can see that clearly right now in terms of the lens of even when we look at Michael Bloomberg. What we're talking about is calcified wealth. We're talking about calcified poverty. See, one of the things that we like to think our way out of, one of the great things about this book is that it takes us out of a lot of things that we believe that just were not true. We always believe that if I had done X, X would have happened. If we had started our own banks, it would have happened. No, you have to have institutional support. And you can't start a bank without the protection of courts and government. You can't have a freedman's bank that gets looted by white people. We put all the money in the bank to buy land, and then they just take it. And there's nobody there to say you can't do that to them because we don't count and we don't matter. There's no way to be successful under the yoke of not mattering in the country that you built. And so when I say you see the lens of Bloomberg, what you see there is like a calcification of wealth. So what we're living now, we're not living a period of creation where we're building railroads. We're living people who were able to make money do that during that period, and that money has calcified and grown, and they're living off the interest. They don't have to do anything because they're living off of inherited generational wealth, and we are dying off of inherited generational poverty. That is the life that we have been forced to live. And at a certain point, you have to come forward and say, this is not right. Not only is it not right, we can't survive under these circumstances. You cannot survive if during a time where people were creating wealth, we were taken off the board and not even allowed to compete. You cannot survive if during a period where people were creating wealth, they were using you to create wealth. Even after slavery, they were killing us, putting men in peonage farms where more than half died. It reminds you in certain ways of these work programs and the torture of like what happened during the Holocaust, just putting people and working them to death, working you until you starve out, and then we just go pick up more black men on the street. You cannot function if America doesn't do right by you, by us. We always have this. We've had reparations given to other groups, but nobody wants to pay us because the cost is high. Because when you build the richest country in the world, the cost is really high. That's an enormous dollar amount that you have to pay, but pay you do and pay you must. You can't look at Bloomberg, who's going around buying an election, basically paying for all the ads. I was watching a YouTube video the other day and I saw it was all of the ads with Bloomberg. He done bought up all the ads. What do you do with that? And we say, well, we can just pool our money. Yeah, you can pool your money and buy 2 ads. He done bought up all the ads. Right? He done bought up your politicians. We don't want to talk about that. All of a sudden, all the politicians are pro-Bloomberg. Well, he can, wait a minute. Everything you said you believed went out the window. You just were opposed to stop and frisk. Now it's okay? You just said you didn't like what he said about discrimination. You didn't like it, but now it's okay? See, us not having inherited wealth, what that means is that our politicians can't have principles because they're made into beggars, which means we really don't have politicians. We really don't have any representation. We have people who look like us who will say the right thing, but when that money comes in and turns that wheel, we're in trouble. And that's because we don't even have money to give them and donate to them en masse, because during the time where people were creating fortunes, we were used to create fortunes and we couldn't create fortunes of our own. You know that when we're not represented in each tier. We're supposed to be represented. If you have a meritocracy, if you didn't have slavery, we're represented in each tier. We have poor black people, we have lower middle, we have middle, we have upper middle, we have upper class, we have rich, we have super rich. We will be represented throughout the tier. When you see us all on the bottom, that lets you know that this was intentional. This was intentional to say these Negroes have to keep picking cotton for us for cheap so that we can build stuff that they can never take advantage of. You know what? They can't even grow their own food, because if they grow their own food, then they eat and they live and they don't create money for us. You can't be a group how we have been made into a group where everyone just extracts from us, but we can't ever build anything for ourselves. And that is reparation, because there is a due. When you've taken a group out of what they need to survive and be American and live the dream, when you've taken our ability to do that out, what that means is that you have to pay that back, because people are living, nobody is creating now in that sense. Everybody's living off generational wealth. There was a great article in the Atlantic that said white kids are doing great off their parents' inheritance. So you have to have, that means you have to have at least been white in a particular moment. How can we reverse that? So I think you have to understand that in order to understand ADOS. You have to, when we talk about slavery, it's not American descendants of slaves, it's American descendants of slavery as the institution and what the institution has meant in terms of our systemic oppression. And they just find a way every time, even when slavery is technically over, they find a way to re-engineer our oppression and to sometimes make us co-sign our own oppression by making us think that a black bank is the solution. You don't have no money. You have to give us something to put in that black bank because a black bank has to be an engine of wealth creation, meaning you can give loans. You can't do that without money in that bank, especially in a world where we have Bloombergs. So I just wanted to give you that much to kind of show you where we are in this election phase, in this ADOS phase, and I think in a lot of ways we're being proven right. You know, we said vote Democratic down ballot. You saw it on the video. Now you see everybody on you see everybody on Twitter, every black leftist saying, well, we're not gonna show up. Wait a minute, when we said we were voting down ballot, y'all said we were co-signing Trump. Now you say it too. Now you get it. So I think everybody's coming around, and what's happening with ADOS is just we just keep getting validated. When you keep getting validated, especially getting validated by the people who have scorched you and criticized you, I think you begin to understand, yeah, we're on the right track and we're doing God's work. So I just want to thank Dr. Cosby. I want to thank you all for having me always, all the time, without a doubt. Simmons College, St. Stephen's Church, I just want to thank all y'all. So I appreciate you for showing up and filling up this room.
Duke Samuel Dubois Cook Center on Social Equity and Insight Center for Community Economic Development bring to you what we get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap. Myth 1, greater educational attainment or employment rates on the part of blacks will close the racial wealth disparity. We can't outrun this with diplomas. Myth 2, the racial home ownership gap is the driver of the racial wealth gap. We can't expect real estate to be our escape from historical wealth inequality. Myth 3, banking black and buying black close the racial wealth gap. We can't use black dollars to spend our way out of the racial wealth gap. Myth 4, black people saving more will close the racial wealth gap. Myth 5, greater rates of financial literacy will close the racial wealth gap. Myth 6, entrepreneurship will close the racial wealth gap. Myth 7, emulating so-called successful minorities will close the racial wealth gap. Myth 8, improved soft skills will close the racial wealth gap. Myth 9, the growing number of black celebrities prove that the racial wealth gap is closing. Myth 10, black family disorganization is the cause of the racial wealth gap. None of the mythology that pushes narratives that black Americans are their own worst enemy will close the racial wealth gap. Instead, we need policy that is transformative in imagination, such as racial reparations, baby bonds, or a federal jobs guarantee. Learn more by reading the full report today. How's everybody doing today? So this is a little impromptu, so I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the numbers of things so we can actually see where white and black wealth is. In 2018, I did a report with William Sandy Darity, who's a leading intergenerational economist in this space, which means the transfer of wealth between people. That report is on Duke's website. This video was done with that report, and essentially what we dealt with is the mythology of what we think can close the wealth gap between whites and blacks. But to understand that mythology, you have to understand the gap itself. I think a lot of us presume, because we use the word black and we use the word white, that it's a 1-to-1 ratio, and it just isn't. If we could pull up the first chart. So this chart here came out maybe a month ago. And what this chart shows is the amount of household wealth that whites have versus black folk.
So this is 1990, and this is 2020. The start is 1990, and the end is 2020. From slavery through Jim Crow into 1990, when Oprah's on the air and Cosby is on the air, and we think that black folks is achieving, all America had as a gap was $25 trillion in household wealth for whites and around like 1.2, 1.5 for blacks. From 1990 to present day, we now have $100 trillion in wealth in white hands. And blacks have 2. Now, what's insane about this is when you understand how many black millionaires there are. I got with a guy named Matt Brunig who worked for demos.org, and I said, Matt, no one in American history has shown black folks how many millionaires there are. We think that we use the word millionaire, so we have millionaires. So I got with Matt Brunig, and when the Federal Reserve put out their survey of consumer finances, they put out every 3 years, that gives us some evaluation of household wealth. What we saw when we pulled the micro data is there really aren't black millionaires. Not there aren't any, but there are almost none. So in America, there are about 20 million black families. There's 83 million white families. 83 million white families. Understand that of the 83 million white families, maybe about 15 million are worth $1 million or more. Or more. 1 million white families are worth $10 million or more. White America has almost all of America's wealth. See, when we say white and black, it sounds like 1-in-1 ratio. Black America has 20 million families. Out of that 20 million families, to be in the top 5% of that whole group, all you have to have is $350,000 net. That's not liquid, net. You can have 30,000, 50,000 in the bank and be in the top 5% of black households. But millionaires, there might be 350,000 black families across this nation worth $1.2 million or more. And we can't break this part out, but I'm willing to bet 200,000 don't break 2 million. We own nothing. The reflection of owning nothing means that all of the household wealth is in white hands. One of the things that you find in Mirza Badarian's book is that a mere 20 years after slavery, the arguments already started that slavery was a long time ago. You had it coming out of the courts that we don't need to do anything affirmatively for black people because it was 20 years ago. Let it go. Out of Mirza Badarian's book, what you also see is the arguments that I came over here with nothing in my pocket does not deal with the realities of whiteness being put into your skin and the advantages that came off of that. The ability to access what they call the American Broadway. While black folks were forced to deal with a secondary economy. Can we pull up the decile chart? It's the one that shows it. Yeah. No, the next one. This chart is just as important as the first one. Black America has about $2 or so trillion of wealth. White America has 100. But this chart here came from somebody named Matt Brunig that I did my piece with, and we've never seen wealth this way. Sandy Darity hadn't seen it this way. This shows black America by decile. What that means is that if you were to take all 20 million families, every decile is 2 million families. So of the 2.6% of wealth that black folks have, the top 10% or 2 million families have 75% of that. The top 4 million black families have 90% of the 2.6. So basically, the rest of the race is wealthless. This group is largely black boomers, not celebrities. Now, I'm not saying that to blame black boomers, but to tell you something ominous is on the horizon when they pass on. I'm telling you today that Whether you want to know the numbers or not, the numbers are real. Can we go back to the chart that was up before that? See, it's important to, the one that you showed with it's important to understand all of these numbers because we all think we know that we're black. And we all think we know that we're white. Until I show you the numbers and I tell you, you never understood race in America the way that race in America tells us the truth about being locked out and locked under. This chart here is income. Because I hear a lot of people say, well, we don't have wealth. Well, maybe we have some income. We got income, right? Now, one thing is this chart was the last one they released. See, the government before about the 90s, and one of the things that I did in the beginning of this is I interviewed people. I interviewed Thomas Shapiro, who wrote with Melvin Oliver, Black Wealth, White Wealth, and came up with the term racial wealth gap. It's on my YouTube. And it was a lot of things Thomas couldn't answer. Liked him a lot, but what he couldn't answer is why he used the word gap. I said, Tom, doesn't gap give a false image that we almost home? He said, yeah, we probably used the wrong word.
Yes.
Because it isn't a gap. It's basically one group has everything and the other is basically a parasitic group off of the one that has everything.
Yes.
I interviewed Darren. I interviewed Color of Law, Rothstein, who came in and showed us how Louisville was built, along with cities like Louisville, all across the country. How race was constructed. But this chart here is our gate to hiding. Because what we tell ourselves is, even though we might not have wealth, I know somebody with a good job. Now, the Pew Research came out with data less than a month ago. And what they said is the median income for a household that's in the middle class is $87,700. The median income for a household in the upper class, not rich, upper class is $207,000. What this chart does is challenges everything we think we know about race, because what it shows us is the truth based on the data. I want y'all to see something. 21% of black households make, this is two incomes, make less than $12,500. A full 58% make less than $38,000. So what you're looking at is over half the race makes less than $35,000 combined. Again, the middle income for a middle class family is about $87,700. Let's see how long it takes us to get to $87,700. Well, we got a $87,499. Well, if you add those numbers up, you find that only 10% of black families even break the middle class income. Now, the problem with income is we live in an America, can we go back to the first chart? Where if you don't have wealth transfers, you can end up with an income that gets eaten up by the fact that you don't have wealth transfers. They said that about $68 trillion of this will be transferred from white boomers to their millennial children over the next decade or so. That means that for your child to be successful, you better be leaving them a house, a car, not student debt. You better be, this is the reality. So what black folks say is it's my fault that I can't leave those things. But what they don't understand is what's in this book.
Come on, man.
And what's in this book is the truth that it never was your fault.
Never.
You were locked out from the Freedmen's Bank. You were locked out from redlining. See, Michael Bloomberg told us what? He said the other day that, the banks were forced and that redlining was really about loaning to the poor. And what Michael Bloomberg told us is he doesn't understand America. But he still got the support of Meeks and Abrams. He don't have the support of Adolf though. And I'm saying this because I want to come to the next thing that I showed up. When we look at America, we got to start laying it out for everybody. Because we forget everything that happened before 1980. The reason why it's important is because we get caught in the murk. So many black immigrants, and no disrespect to them, say, what about Shirley Chisholm? What about Marcus Garvey? What about all of these people? And what I say back to them is, I know the numbers. You cannot play me with games. What about your father? Don't tell me about Shirley Chisholm or Kwame Ture. Tell me about your father. That's when they go quiet. Because their father came in 1996 or 1983. It doesn't anchor them into the story and the narrative of being locked out of America. See, part of what ADOS has done is introduced an awareness of being American in a way that other people should have known but just didn't know. The Smithsonian told us, when you find this article, you got to dig into the article. Before 1965, the amount of black immigrants in America was to the right of the decimal. See, before 1965, pretty much black immigrants came here for school. Between 1965 and 1980, you had a slight boom. When I say slight, we went from near zero to about 800,000. From 1980 to present, we have 8 million. So what does that tell us? That tells us almost 90% of the black immigrants came after Jim Crow. But somehow, we all supposed to get reparations from America for slavery and Jim Crow. The chart shows us that America had slavery before America was America. The book tells us America had slavery after slavery. How many people read the book? I'm not putting nobody on the spot. If you have not read this book, The Color of Money, it's a quick read. You really should read it. Because what it talks about is after slavery, if you were a black man and you got a farm and you didn't want to pick no more cotton because you called that a slave product, Britain said, we need you to pick cotton. See, a lot of people think that slavery was a Southern institution. Slavery was an American institution. Let me break it down for a second. Just simple things. All of the ports were in New York. 70% of the cotton went to Great Britain. So of course they didn't have slaves. Their slaves was here. The notes for the slave plantations were held by the banks in Great Britain and in New York. All of the clothes were made up north and shipped down. Fundamentally, what we start unwinding is a world where black people were binded to slavery, recasted through mass incarceration, created into an undercast, and now are being told that we're all the same. And I'm thinking ADOS ignites an awareness and a discussion where we start to have a kind of a pulling apart of that. Do we have something else after this? I just want to. Yeah. One of my friends, he actually did a 12-minute video for the conference. Is now among the wealthiest blacks in America. Might end up with just the Weather Channel being the wealthiest black man in the history of the nation. His name's Byron Allen. You can pull the other one up. I have an interview that I got with him maybe about 3 years ago, but I talk to him regularly for hours and hours about race and wealth. In a similar format to talking to Darity, probably even more so, what he exposes to me and to many black folks is the limitations of black capital. He currently is suing Comcast for $20 billion. For those of you that might think that's a fantastical number, it's in the Supreme Court right now. What the lawsuit is over is the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Civil Rights Act of 1866 guaranteed that the newly freed slave would be able to contract. Now, essentially, the reason why I bring him up in this context is because the same issues that the Freedmen Bank was going through then, Byron Allen, Puff Daddy, are going through now. The same issues that we saw then with slavery, we see in Parchman Prison now. But no one is talking about it. Abrams signed on with Bloom, got $5 million from Bloomberg. You got Meeks, and he done endorsed Bloomberg. You got Bernie, he don't want to talk about reparations. No one wants to deal with the reality that ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, are a unique group. They called us divisive, right, Matt?
Absolutely.
But if you say Jamaican, it's not divisive because it's a country. We in America, though. So for us to acknowledge our lineage and our mix, you know, it's a trip because for white people and for black people, you just don't know the studies and the numbers. I saw one study, small study, and it sometimes doesn't matter the numbers, where they looked at Jamaicans, 300 Jamaicans, sometimes doesn't matter the number, and they were 95% African. ADOS people tend to be around 15 to 20% white because we lived with our slave owner. We're fundamentally a different and unique group with a different and unique culture, and we're owed a debt in the trillions. Okay, and we're owed a black agenda. I'll let Dr. Cotter know.
What do you mean when you say down ballot, voting down ballot?
Well, Democratic down ballot is leaving the top blank, the top of that ticket. Voting Democratic down ballot. So we normally vote Democrat anyway. That's normally depending on what state you live in. Some states are different, but you get a Democratic ballot when you go in there because we vote overwhelmingly Democrat. That's what we do. But you're leaving the top of that ticket blank. Or if you can write in, there's some places where you can write in, you can write in ADOS, write it in. But you vote for the other lawmakers who you decide, or you vote against other people. So you vote for other Democrats that you see and you want to vote for and you want to support. You vote for them. There are people that need your support. There are local people that need your support. You might actually have a congressperson who you think is doing a good job or whatever, depending on what you do. But that top of the ticket, nobody has given us anything on the top of that ticket. We haven't, and I'm still waiting. Everybody can figure it out. But at the top of that ticket, I don't see anybody who is is planning to give us an exchange. I see people planning to do Medicare for all and spend all kinds of money and redistribute wealth and give our reparations to white America. I see that, but I don't see them giving us an exchange. So leave that top Democrat down ballot. Leave that top blank though, or write it in.
One additional thing I wanted to say, I meant to say this earlier. ADOS pushes black America out of optics into politics, and I think that destroys our relationship in many ways with the Democratic Party as it's been, the Clinton Democratic Party. One data point that I use to give as an example is one that happened under Obama, probably one of the most important. While blacks lost their homes, we literally went from 2012 to 2016 from 5 million, pretty much all white people that were millionaires, to 12. By boosting the stock market, they were in the stock market, we weren't, we didn't have the wealth. They created a new white wealth class. That's what you saw in the chart. Part of what we're saying is that we want our due, we want our reparation, and as a result, unless you acknowledge us and acknowledge a black agenda and start to acknowledge a plan for reparations, we not voting for you.
Two quick questions. I want to entertain some questions. Question, that is, unpack the problem with people of color. Secondly, help us understand Obama through an ADOS lens.
The problem with people of color is that it's a throwaway term. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as just throwing all. I don't even know how we got here that we don't understand how disrespectful that is. We all have different lineages, different legacies. I don't care whether you're Haitian, you have the legacy of Toussaint L'Ouverture, you have all of that. I don't care where depending on where you come from, right? If you come from Honduras, wherever you come from, you could be brown. We have legacies, different legacies and lineages. But what they have done is thrown us all in one basket, and that serves a couple of purposes. One, you get to kind of mask our failure, right? So if we all people of color the same, and then there are some quote-unquote people of color who are successful, well, look at y'all. People of color are doing better. Y'all are doing wonderful. No. You have to take us out of that data set. And what you'll see is that ADOS aren't doing well at all. We're cratering. We're going over a cliff. But see, if you put people of color all in that same basket, you don't even see. You can't even see it. You can't even see our failure. All you see is a bunch of brown faces. You see Indian Americans right now are running Silicon Valley. I'm talking about when you look at the number of CEOs, when you looked at, not even just that, it was a PepsiCo. You see there's a whole articles about Indian Americans and their power in Silicon Valley. That's a person of color, but is that the same as me? We're being purged from Silicon Valley. Ain't us on in Silicon Valley like that? Talking about we can't find jobs. So you have to, the whole people of color thing is like a sleight of hand. It's a game to make us not see how we live in this country. So you have to say, no, we're going to do a specific little carve out that carves out our contribution and our cost. Contribution and cost, the math of our lives. That is what it does when you take us outside of that and you say, no, we're ADOS, don't count us in people of color. I don't even like to see reports where it says Latinos and blacks. No, take those two out. Because when you put them together, it looks like we're doing kind of bad, and we all kind of doing bad the same, but we all kind of making it up the same. No, talk about Latinos specifically, and talk about ADOS specifically. And I want you to take black immigrants out and talk about them specifically. Let's have some specificity to this conversation, and then you will really see our plight. But nobody really wants to see it, because if you see it, then you got to fix it, and nobody want to fix it.
One of probably the primary cover of ADOS in America over the last 25 years has been Barack Obama, President Barack Obama. Now, this moves beyond just a data analysis from him rising the number of white millionaires, leading to the creation of Uber. You know, Uber came to rise under Obama. We didn't have hitchhiking pickups before that. But into an actual identity evaluation of Obama. I remember talking to my great aunt who is now nearing 80. And she said, you got to understand that we never seen a black man get elected that way. I didn't vote for Obama. I voted down ballot both elections, 08 and 12. The reason why is because I was looking at politics. But I also was looking at lineage. And when I talked about lineage, I'm looking at the fact that on one side, Obama was white. And that one side is the dominant side because that's who raised him. And there's nothing wrong with being raised by a white person. But all of a sudden now, you are anchored in the privilege of being white. A lot of people don't know his white grandmother left him $500,000 liquid while in office. Now, for those people that don't understand, that means that during his life, he probably was getting gifts, which we're aware of, that was like being a white person. I mean, elite. I mean, there might be 0.1% of black people that will inherit $500,000 liquid in America. There might be 15% of white people that will inherit $500,000 liquid. But the election of Obama made white people feel there was progress. But it only kept that chart that I showed going up. Now, let's talk about his other side. He's Kenyan. But he's not just Kenyan. His dad went to Harvard. So when it was time to check alumni, he could check alumni just like Bush. So you got this guy that is not American descendant of slavery. Most white people didn't know. But you got a city like Louisville built on the very Play-Doh of everything that he is not. Meaning Jim Crow, slavery, all of the cost of ADOS life built cities like this across the country. But then you got him walking on the Pettis Bridge saying we. And so when you start to look at Obama and look at identity, he ultimately exposes the consequence of not dealing with being ADOS. Meaning, on one side, you're Kenyan, and you really have nearly no relationship with that side. We know that from the books and from his discussions. Even if you did have a relationship, it still wouldn't change too much. You have another side where you grew up with a white grandmother that was a banker, and a white mother that was a college graduate. With the private school in Hawaii, the house that the grandparents grew up in was $1 million. But then when it's time to speak for us at Morehouse, you tell black college graduates the same story you tell black prisoners. That's because you are not ADOS. Now, I'm not saying every ADOS is going to do it right. But if I had to roll my cards and throw my dice out, I'll take an ADOS. And I'm saying all this because I'm not saying in and of itself it's a problem that he wasn't ADOS. But the bigger problem is that people couldn't tell the difference.
That's right. We only have one mic, and so if you have a question, and make it a question, as Yvette says, make it concise. And ask a question, but please speak loud if anyone has any questions for Yvette or Antonio. Yes, okay. Then we're going way back. Speak real loud. Question.
My question is, the record keeping on black people in American cities was horrible, in the hospitals, and tracing our ADOS lineage. How will we, and has that been ever addressed, how you find out if you're ADOS? I'm not actually sure, because my mother's birth certificate, she was born in 1928, was incomplete. My father's was complete, but my mother was a part of a lot of African Americans. She was born in St. Louis, Missouri. In larger cities, records were not correctly kept on black people from like the 1900s up until like maybe 1955 or 60.
Let me get this question. Yeah, I'll answer that. I think our race has had an issue with undoing our advantage, we always try to find an out for ourselves. We're not asking you to figure out your lineage. And let me finish. And then our criteria is so low that I know you ADOS.
But I just wanted to.
The thing is, we're not asking you to find which slave in which plantation. There's two criteria, and we didn't create it. I'm thinking of a double knot, and that's actually on our page. But it's very simple. Have you been marking black on your on your license and your ballot for the last 10 to 15 years? One. And number two, can you trace back to a single slave? That's it. A single slave on either side. The reason why you only have to do that is because this generation, and that's why ADOS is so important right now, there still hasn't been, I think that a lot of people don't start with this part of it, which is prior to 1965, there were no black immigrants. Nearly none. They didn't allow them here in any large number. So what you find is that in this generation, if you have family that was here where your grandmama was here, you're ADOS.
1928, come on.
And so I think what a lot of black people, this is the problem with our identity, is we never did the basic work of who are you? Why are you here and what are you owed? But you're ADOS from what you said. Now I don't know what your family tree is, but from what you said, you're ADOS. Now, the other thing that I will address is I've told Darity that I believe there needs to be a double knot for biracials. That's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah. There's a question way in the back. Yes. Yes. Go ahead. Real loud.
Yes, could Yvette talk about other groups shoehorning in on our progress?
Okay, other groups shoehorning in on black project, on ADOS project.
Well, even what you see with even the Civil Rights Act, the white women getting access to affirmative action was supposed to be kind of like a poison pill. And it was never intended to be that way. And we have kind of, in an effort to just have coalitions for the sake of coalitioning, even when we don't get anything in exchange, we have kind of just allowed that and said, well, we got to do. And then everybody else comes in and says, well, we get that too. Yeah, we like, even when we talk about, and Antonio just said, we're talking about Kamala Harris. Like, you come in here and you went to Howard University, that's my alma mater, but that doesn't, so you shoehorn yourself into a freedom struggle. You didn't just shoehorn yourself into ADOS and announce on Martin Luther King Day without a black agenda. You shoehorned your way into a freedom struggle that you were not a part of, out of some kind of Crayola-ness of life. Yeah, her family is elite on both sides. The Jamaican side is elite. Her dad is a professor at Stanford. Her mother was is passed away, but she was a scientist, a cancer researcher. So what you talk about in the top caste in India, like with Brahmin Indian. So what you kind of see is everybody wants to be a part of ADOS because we have this freedom struggle. And a lot of people have successfully shoehorned their way into it without creating their own movement. Like, when you deserve something, you have to kind of do the thing that you deserve on your own. You have to build your own movement. But instead of doing that, we have kind of allowed everybody to shoehorn into it. And so what we have now is a con, it's a scam. So what do I mean when I say it's a scam? What stops a white man who wants to do a business from saying, hey, my white wife gets a minority grant or whatever? I can't compete against that. You can't compete against that. But that is the danger. When LBJ went to Howard University and talked about affirmative action, he was talking about us. He wasn't talking about everybody else. And the failure has been our politicians have not protected our sacred space.
Come on, girl.
In this, we have a sacred space in here. We have a sacred contribution. The bones that are buried, those are our ancestors who died and who contributed and who paid the cost and who paid the price. And we still live that bottom castness. And what you see is that our politicians have given it away in exchange for like careerism and aspiration and in hopes that something wonderful will happen or whatever the case may be.
Elected officials instead of representatives.
Something like that. So that's kind of what we have. I remember there used to be a guy who called to the show and he said we have representatives but not representation. And that's what it leads us to. This whole people of color coalition that doesn't benefit anybody. If you don't take away anything else, understand that when you're a part of some type of coalition, we should have an exchange. We should have terms of agreement. I get this in exchange for my relationship and support of you on this issue, and you get this. We have just been doing stuff out of the fact that, well, it sounds like the right thing to do. That's not how politics works.
You mentioned representatives without representation. Could you, for example, with DACA, you helped expose what was going on in Selma with hookworms. Could you tell what you did?
Well, you had, what was her name? Oh, Terry Sewell, Congresswoman Terry Sewell. You look in her district, right? And she's putting out all kind of tweets and having conversations about DACA and Dreamers need to be here. And we were the original Dreamers, so I even have a problem with that language. But you see her putting out all of this stuff about DACA, and you go and you look at her district and you find that, hey, you don't even have many Latinos, Hispanics in your district. What are you talking about? Your district is majority ADOS, and they don't even have infrastructure. They have hookworms. They don't even have plumbing, and you run around here talking about DACA because it makes Nancy Pelosi very happy. And that's what you're engaged with. And so I did a show and talked about it, and all of a sudden, Congressman Ryan is going now. He maybe used to be majority leader of the House of Representatives or whatever. And she's like, well, I'm going to talk to him about it. We're going to have a conversation. But it shouldn't take us to have to mass tweet you to do what you should be doing for the people in your district. You have to be, there's something that we have to do to unhitch our people who are supposed to be our black representatives in Congress from doing whatever Nancy Pelosi wants them to do. There is no reason you don't even represent a majority Latino district. What are you doing? You in Alabama, honey. What are you doing?
You know, in addition, to give gravity to what she just said about Louds County, Alabama, and hookworms, is the United Nations sent a convoy into this part of Alabama. You can go Google it. And they said this is the worst living conditions in the first world. Now, right next to that in Mississippi is Parchment. Everybody knows what Parchment Prison is and what's going on. So we can just guess what's between Parchment and Louds County. A lot of living like that. Part of what we see right now, and I just had this discussion with Darity, with Yvette, is DACA isn't diametrically, but it's opposed to reparations. Because reparations isn't money. It's not a handout. It's not money just only. It is an elevation of our citizenship.
Right.
See, on one hand, the Democrats are basically diluting citizenship. And part of the game right now is, because there's so much money in white households, I don't need the citizenship, I let my money be my citizenship. But while you dilute citizenship and give the same rights of citizenship to everybody, it impacts ADOS because we don't have the money from being here a long time. So reparations would elevate us so you can keep doing that, but then we get a citizenship plus. You figure out the plus. See, right now, part of the reparations issue is, and I use this example not to be harsh, no one blames a rape victim and says, well, who got you? And who's the attacker? And can you catch him? With reparations, you have discussions amongst ourselves, like the woman had right now, about blaming yourself as a victim of this situation. It is not your responsibility, it is the government's responsibility, because the government failed you. And I'll just say that.
Thank you, Emil. It was on the question over here then.
Right.
Yes, okay.
Can you speak to the argument that down ballot voting would basically guarantee or give Trump the White House for 4 years?
Well, let me say this. Right now, with Bloomberg jumping into the election, Bloomberg could give Trump the election. But nobody's saying that out loud, though, right? You can't get to a point where you blame people for asking for what they're due as giving the election to the other side. We live in an era where groups that are not citizens are basically demanded of Obama with executive order to give them citizenship rights. How did that not give Trump the election? See, I guess I've come to a point where what that argument basically says, and I've heard it before, is if y'all don't give your vote away free and let us vote as white folks for Republicans, because there's no Republican Party without white America. Their whole party is almost white Americans. Then you guys elected the Republican. So let me use the argument again. The white moderate Democrat is chasing the ghosts of white voters that vote Republican instead of being loyal to black ones. For that argument to sit, they would have to be being loyal to us and us demanding more. That argument falls entirely apart. So I guess the idea that our lack of action and demand, because we're not affirmatively saying go vote for Trump, is in some way the reason that Trump would get reelected basically allows white people to run around here and do whatever they want to do at any time.
Let me just say one thing. And I only have one thing to say to that. Like I said in the video, we invited all of the candidates to the conference, right? How many months do we have to the general? That's a long time. At any time, they can come to us and say, listen, we are going to work on your agenda. We are going to have a reparations agenda. Now, we can talk about the details. We're going to have a black agenda and a reparations agenda. We can talk about the details. But by not doing that, they are putting themselves in a position where Trump might get reelected. That's not us. We've been asking and asking, come on, we got to do this. Y'all got to do this. No, they just saying, you're going to continue to be our mule. We're gonna put a bunch of packages on your back. We're gonna put them, and you're gonna carry us in to the White House. Now you're not gonna get anything in return, and you never get anything in return. So hush. That's what you do every year. And so I think the problem is that we're changing that dynamic. We don't want to be the mule. We want to be the voter, and we want to get something in exchange for that vote. And we've told you what it is. We've been very, very clear. And so it's them. They're putting themselves in a position to lose to Trump because they don't want to come through for us. They'll come through on everything. Do y'all remember when Obama was president, when they were talking about Obamacare, it was a big deal that they were even going to try to do something where you pay a little bit. What was it called? What was that called? I can't remember what it was. Now we all the way. We don't went past that.
Public option.
Public option. Public option was so controversial. Now everybody's talking about Medicare for all. Now everybody's talking about paying off student debt. Everybody's talking about everything except what is important for ADOS America.
Come on.
You don't want to talk about it. Bernie gets on the Breakfast Club. I don't know. I don't know. No. You understand. You understand very clearly. You've just decided you're not going to do it. And that decision that you all keep making, that you're not going to do what is in the best interest of ADOS. You're not even going to take us seriously. You're going to send out your surrogates and gatekeepers to handicap us. That decision could prove perilous for you on election day. That's not our fault, though.
One other thing, I just want to make sure, because I said this during the conference, because a lot of us sit back and we don't realize, and I say this to white people will have one friend or a cousin or a brother that voted for Trump. And they just be arguing at the table. Black people won't even know somebody that voted for Trump. The numbers support it. Because when you look at the numbers, you have to understand these numbers to understand the voting, what's happened. In the last election, Hillary Clinton got 38% of the white vote. Donald Trump got 55% of the white vote. That's how he won. That's it. Nearly 90% of black people voted for Hillary Clinton. So the argument that 92% didn't vote for Hillary Clinton is basically ignoring the fact that if only 40% of white people voted for Hillary Clinton, she would have won. Now, this isn't just this election. When you look at all of the elections since like 70,
what you see is that Republicans have gotten the white vote 55% of the time. And Democrats have gotten it around 40% of the time. I mean, Clinton was as that shift happened, was a bit of an outlier. But generally speaking, white people vote Republican. Until you can change the guts of that and deal with that, you're going to have a Republican Party.
All right. One last question, okay? Real loud.
Well, okay, could I have this?
Yeah.
Thank you. I respect ADOS, I want you to know that. But I
Speak to the mic.
I feel like we have to understand. ADOS, you are not the total representative of black progressives. Black Democratic Party candidates are coming. They're coming to Sirius XM. But this is not to beat up on ADOS. ADOS, the voice needs to be heard. But I have to ask you this. You mentioned,
okay.
well,
Just be still. Talk now. You talk.
if you mentioned people of color, you don't like that. No racial group likes people of color. Asian Americans, that is an umbrella term. Hmong don't like that, but the least of Asian Americans benefit from that umbrella, people of Asian Americans. We, ADOS, could benefit from people of color. We shouldn't throw that away. One last thing. I respect and admire what ADOS is doing. I see why others should not be included, but I want you to know, we have come, I'm a sociologist, we have come for 30 years, the case for reparations has been built, and it's stronger and stronger and stronger, and each time we hear about it, people are nodding their head. This is not the time to who should get it or what should it be. We should fight for the reality that it needs to be given. Once this society acknowledges we have benefited simply because of our whiteness, you have benefited simply because of your blackness, then we can agree we're going to do it. Then you can sit down and talk about who should get it, who shouldn't, what should it be. That's my comment. And I hope you take it with respect.
Let me say two things. I respect that you said it with respect, but what at the base you're saying is regardless of whether you come from Jim Crow and slavery, you should get reparations.
No,
you don't know. You can shake your head, but I'm saying you're saying get the pie, and then just don't give it to the white folk. White folk will never sign on to that because they don't owe people that got here in 1988. They owe the people in Louisville on the West End that have been locked out. They don't owe somebody in Haiti. The Caribbean has CARICOM, and I respect CARICOM, but you can't get CARICOM and then get this too. And I'm saying this to you because I think fundamentally we got to slow this down because I think we've said there's a reparations discussion, and you were there. There hasn't been. Fundamentally, everybody's told me, young black people, why don't you do politics? What I saw was the Congressional Black Caucus. I met with Karen Bass. I taught Karen Bass the same stuff I taught to you for 2 hours. What I saw was a black caucus that went to Ghana and talked about going on tours. What I saw is a black caucus that was not on the steps of the Supreme Court when the Civil Rights Act of 1860 was being challenged. What I saw was an NAACP that was on the Supreme Court steps the day before Byron Allen's case with the DACA case and left. We don't know because of donations or what was going on, but they left on purpose. And the only people on the Supreme Court steps were ADOS people. I mean, when Byron Allen comes out of the Supreme Court, we have 600 people there, and we don't collect dues. And I'm saying all this because I feel like and I respect what you're saying, but it's a bit of a disrespect to say that there's a progressive black group. Because what I'm seeing right now, I'm just telling you my view, is a group that has largely, and I don't know you personally, put themselves up for sale. And when I say that, I'm seeing, we're gonna, let's talk numbers real quick. Wouldn't it be great to forgive all the student debt? That's what they say, right? That'll help everybody, right? You know what that really does? It stabilizes the white middle class. Let me tell you how.
only 16% of Adolph's people went to college. 40% of white people went to college.
Make that strong.
We already know that within the lifetime, white people have the money and pay it off for their kids at some point. Much higher rates, like 75, 80%. We already know that Adolph's people never pay it off for their kids. Very low, 5, 10%. So what we want to do is let them keep that money, white folks. And also, forget the 84% of black people that didn't go to college. So we're going to make this all about white stabilization, but not talk about reparations and not talk about the people that didn't go to college. So what does it help a black kid that went and became a doctor or a lawyer if their brother or sister is still on food stamps? What does it help a black kid? What does it help a black kid to forgive their student debt? I have 6-figure student debt. If in fact, at the end of the day, their community is still on fire. I'm saying this because the larger lens we come, and I'll let Yvette talk about the people of color. It really does help Asians, and it really does help Latinos, and it really does help black immigrants. Who it doesn't help is Adolph's people, because what it ends up doing is anchor them in our story. What do I mean? If you go to different places in this world, Tijuana, if you walk, you don't get anything naturally going into Mexico. The anchor for the whole discussion is the fact that there was slavery here. That's why every group, when they start their discussion, they start talking about Martin Luther King and dreamers and everything else. Because if you start the discussion in 95, I doubt some white person that's in here, that's in Louisville, will want to give you something. You came here in 95 on purpose. You're a voluntary immigrant. And so I think that to unpack this thing, I feel like
We're not voluntary immigrants.
No, we're not at all. I feel like what's starting to happen is that there's a presumption, kind of like I said earlier, that we're almost home inside of the analysis. Let's just get the pie. If we get the pie right now, my belief is half of it will go to immigrants. Because they're positioned to take it all. You see it right now. Who has the jobs in Google? Who has all? What you see is, I told you that 10% of black people make more than 87.7. Let me use, and I'll say one last thing.
Hollywood, could you tell me?
I'm gonna tell them about Los Angeles. What we know is that the Federal Reserve, along with Darity and Hamilton, they went around the country for the first time ever and broke out blacks by ethnic group in different cities. So we can see the wealth level of Adolph's people for the first time ever. In Miami, the middle black family, Adolph's family, native family, is worth $11 liquid. The middle Caribbean family from Haiti, this is the poorest country in the hemisphere, is worth $3,000. We are below that. But LA tells you even more. In LA, the middle black family was worth $200 liquid. The middle African family, and I'm not faulting or saying where the money comes from right now. I'm just dealing with the numbers. The middle African family was worth about $150,000. Now I'll tell you this, the white family was $355,000. But the middle African family was worth $150,000, 70 of it being liquid. So we're worth 200 in the city. They're worth. Now understand what that means in terms of numbers and what it does in terms of numbers. I, as Google or the courts, just have to go get an African that already has the wealth that didn't come from slavery, and I can ignore you. Because I done got some black people. What it also tells you is this. We know that only 5% of black people are worth $350, and maybe about 10% are worth $150 or more. Well, the middle Nigerian family in LA is worth $150. Half their population in LA is in the top 10% of black folks. Half the Nigerian population in Los Angeles is in the top 10% of black folks. You have to partition it, because the only way I see that could work is if we was only slaves for 5 years, like it was 5 years ago, or for that matter, they had really come in mass numbers, say in 1800 or 1700. None of the data supports that.
Well, what I would say about benefiting from being people of color and all being, I don't ever see how that's worked.
Being at the bottom of the people of color, those are the least, get more. They get drawn in, like Asian Americans.
And let me just say what I think we have a problem. I don't think we should compare ourselves to anybody. Like, because our contribution and our history in this country is so distinct from any other group. And let me just say this, even with what you said about being kind of negative in terms of being divisive or carving ourselves out, it's always funny to me that nobody ever says that to Native Americans. Native Americans are very specific about what the rules are to being Cherokee or whatever the case may be. It's not even just being Native American, very specific to that tribe. They're very specific. And nobody comes in and says, you're being divisive. They're very specific about about their land, about how you get in, about the casinos. They're very specific in terms of what their ask is. And nobody says that specificity makes you divisive. It's only when we say, hey, hold on, we're a specific group with a specific background. We love you to death, but we're not the same. That people come in and say, well, you're being divisive. And that lets me know that this is anti-ADOS rhetoric that is intended to keep us away from our inheritance, which is our justice claim, because it doesn't happen with anybody else. The second thing I'll say is this: when people talk about the reparations movement, right? Everything has to have a certain kind of pillar. And when you look at other reparations movement, they didn't want to make other people upset. So it was about just being black or being African or being Pan-African, or we have to be there with our brothers and sisters in red, black, and green and all of that stuff. And I said, no, your flag is not the RBG flag. Your flag is that American flag. Get behind that flag. That's your flag, like it or not. You have no home but this one. Once we understand that and get in line with that, and we build this movement based on the data that we have, that Antonio's been so good at breaking down. Nobody else has built the movement with those pillars. See, your house is only as strong as your foundation. We got a wonderful foundation. Everybody else had a real shoddy foundation. Now, I don't mean no disrespect to them, but they kept doing it wrong. And I just got to call it out, because that's the foundation. Because that tells you, when you look at that data, that tells you over and over again, we look at the data and when you look at the history. Understand that we have focused on historians and economists. When you look at the history of what happened to us, and then you look at the data, the history created that data, and that data has not gone up. We are, as a bottom caste, as a group, that is an institutional and intentional failure. And when you build it like that, our house has been built differently and stronger than every other house. So that's why I kind of push back when people say, well, we've always had a reparations movement, and no, not like this, we haven't. And I think that's why it caught the way it caught. I think people, whether they be ADOS or whether they be white, sat back and said, you know what, this is true. This makes perfect sense. And this is not, you can't undo this with individual agency. When you see a whole group in collapse, this is a collective, intentional failure. And it's a failure intention by policies of the United States government, what they did to us and what they allowed to be done to us. And so I don't think you undo what has been done to us specifically with a people of color umbrella. No. It's too much rain. We don't need that umbrella.
Well, brothers and sisters, this is just the appetizer. The main course will be tomorrow night at the Crescent Hill Baptist Church at 7 o'clock. I think it's exciting that we started our conversation in black space, but we will never get to where we need to get to if it stays within black space. We're going to white space tomorrow, Crescent Hill Baptist Church, to talk on these things. And so I hope you will join us tomorrow, and Dr. Mersha Baradaran will be our guest. This book is a phenomenal book, The Color of Money. The author will be here. She'll be discussing the book, and then there's going to be a dialogue with Q&A that will be led by Yvette and Antonio. All right? Yes.
I just want to say one thing quickly. I've been to so many of these kinds of things, and this is the kind of information that a room of white people need to hear. Amen.
Students need to hear this. Students' parents need to hear this. Grandparents need to hear this of the white population. We're clueless. And I mean that across the board. Yes, there are some people like myself that like to come to these things, learn these things, and there's lots of us. There aren't enough of us. This message needs to not just be black audiences. You all need to learn it too. We know that because we think we know what we think we know and we don't. And we're not aware. This kind of information is so solid. It's black and white. It's clear as can be. And people need to know it. You need to get in the schools, grade school, middle school, high school, churches, community organizations, community meetings.
all kinds of things so that the world, all of us, learn and can understand this isn't whimsical. This is real. It needs to be dealt with. It needs to be learned. It needs to be understood. And then maybe some change can happen. I've learned so much here today and so many things that I do come to. This is just one more step forward, and please keep moving forward.
Excellent. Well, again, let's give an applause for... Oh, yes, and by the way, I don't think anyone has influenced me any greater than Yvette and Antonio. And every week, I tune into their podcast, which the information is overwhelming. And breakingbrown.com, Yvette, Mondays around 9:30 Louisville time, 10-ish, okay, 10-ish. Mondays and Wednesdays, breakingbrown.com.
Well,
YouTube Live, and then Tone Talks, which is Fridays, about 10 o'clock Louisville time, anytime. Or you can go and watch it, you know, PM. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Bless you, sir. Thank you so much. Please come out tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Let's pack up the place. Help get the word out, all right? Come and shake hands if you like with our guests. Thank you.